Keir Starmer heading off to America for the United Nations meetings, where him and David Lammy have both delivered really impressive speeches, although don't expect to get as much coverage in most of the UK media as borrowing a mate's flat for a few weeks while his son was doing his GCSEs. Make of that what you will. And while he's there, he's meeting Donald Trump. And then, I don't know if you heard my learned colleague John Sopel on Nick's show earlier talking about his new book, splendidly titled new book, Strangeland, which draws on John's unique perspective, really, as somebody with a foot in both America and the United Kingdom as this curious period of recent history began to unfold. So what on earth could knit all of those things together? Particularly the Fayed angle. Well, when you think about it, it's possibly obvious. Donald Trump, of course, remains an adjudicated rapist and a self-confessed sex offender. It's so hard to keep track of which legal cases against him are still live, which are settled, which are likely to be banjaxed by the appalling decisions of a Supreme Court to which he made appointments designed chiefly to allow him to avoid justice, or at least to avoid scrutiny for crimes committed in the past. It's so hard to keep track of that. But we know for a fact that he boasts about his sex offending, and a judge found that he had libeled a woman who accused him of rape, which is where the phrase adjudicated rapist comes from. And the idea that you can grab women by their genitals once you achieve a certain level of celebrity and or power, and I suppose most obviously both, that idea explains how Mohammed Fayed could get away with his serial sex offending as well. There is a point at which not only do you achieve a form of impunity, but you also can surround yourself with people who will defend you from the consequences of your own actions, who will help you create a false reality. You probably remember Nigel Farage coming into bat for Donald Trump after he confessed to being a serial sex offender. There are always people whose own self-interest, self-advancement and greed will persuade them to defend the indefensible. And that's the word I'm picking up on first this morning, indefensible. Indefensible. Because one of the things I drew, in fact, the main thing I drew from John's book, from John Sopel's book, I think John's on full disclosure this week, actually. I'm pretty sure he is. So we'll play a little clip from that later in the programme. But the thing that I read with goggle eyes was his recollections of the events of January the 6th, when Donald Trump essentially unleashed a mob of murderous lunatics upon Congress, upon Capitol Hill, baying for the blood of his own Vice President, Mike Pence. I knew at the time, and I know now, what the details of the scandals, the story, the situation were. But the reason I read it goggle-eyed was because sometimes when the evidence is all assembled in one place, page upon page, even though you know it all, seeing it all assembled in one place is a strange experience, a strangely cathartic experience, or shocking is a better word, a strangely shocking experience. So you may, I don't know, remember that they had gallows with them, which you think must have been some sort of pantomime prop. But what Sopel reminds you of as you read into it is that actually, no, there were people who would, had they succeeded, they would have tried to kill the vice president because he was refusing to ratify the election. He was refusing to do his democratic duty, his constitutional duty, and ratify the results of the election, and therefore anoint Joe Biden as President of the United States of America. The Secret Service were phoning their loved ones to make their peace and to say their goodbyes because their hiding places in the Capitol building they feared would be breached. They thought they would be found. And these people who were very much responding to Donald Trump's exhortations, very much doing his bidding, they were going to kill members of Mike Pence's security on the way to killing Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence, the Speaker of the House, who would have the role, I think, of anointing Joe Biden as president if Mike Pence wasn't there, and Mike Pence himself, Donald Trump's own vice president. I mean, do you know, part of me wonders whether, as the American election gets closer, we should just sit here every day reflecting upon where we are. We're looking at the very real possibility of that man returning to the White House. A man who sought to subvert democracy in the most irrefutable and inarguable way. A man who unleashed a murderous mob upon his own vice president because he was so incapable of admitting defeat. It's extraordinary, right? And a man who sat there, something else, I must stop plugging John's book and start plugging my own again. There's something else in John's book about Trump sitting in the dining room at the White House where he'd had a massive television installed. Previous presidents hadn't felt the need to have a massive television screen in front of them when they were eating their dinner. And just watching it as people pleaded with him to intervene, pleaded with him to do things. He was watching it, hoping against hope that the insurrectionists, the rioters, the aspiring murderers would succeed. And if you're worried about, or if you're wondering why I worry so much about where we are potentially, Ben reminds us in the first text that I'll read out, the second text that I'll read out today, very simply that J.D. Vance, if he becomes vice president, would be more than willing to do what Mike Pence refused to do that day, and that will be one of the main reasons why Trump has appointed him. So when Keir Starmer talks about the need for a good relationship with Donald Trump. And this is where, if you're wondering, this is where I wonder whether I understand anything. So I move effortlessly on mornings like this. I don't know whether I had an extra shot of espresso or something like that, but I can move effortlessly from seeing patterns in all sorts of things to wondering whether I actually understand anything. David Lammy has described Donald Trump as a neo-Nazi sociopath and a tyrant in a toupee. I don't know whether Trump wears a toupee or not, but I do know that he's a woman-hating, neo-Nazi, sympathizing sociopath and poses a profound threat to the international order that has been the foundation of Western progress for so long. I don't know whether or not that is something he would now resile from, but when he said it, it was just a matter of fact. And he, as recently as July, having become Foreign Secretary, insisted that he stood by his historical comments. I don't know that he would make them now, because, of course, he's Foreign Secretary, but he has essentially said that he will work with whoever ends up in the White House. Emily Thornberry, a similarly outspoken senior Labour politician, has kind of found herself in a similar situation where she has to acknowledge that there needs to be a certain amount of relationship building. You can't march into the room and call him a racist, but she has given an interview this morning in which she explains that she does. I mean, this is hardly a controversial or even a challengeable position. She does believe that he is a racist and that you call out the racist conduct if it occurs. Which brings us back to Mohammed Fayed, doesn't it? And I don't know whether I've got this right. Arabic scholars can possibly enlighten me. I call him Mohammed Fayed because I think Al is an honorific that he bestowed upon himself. I think I don't know if that sounds petty or even accurate, but I just remember from the distant days when I was a gossip columnist, someone telling me, don't call him Mohammed Al Fayed. It makes him sound grander than he is. It's an honorific that he has bestowed upon himself, the Al. It brings us back to Mohammed Fayed, where if you wanted to rise through the ranks at Harrods when he was in charge, then you would have to either turn a blind eye or help facilitate his sex offending. And that's when the question of whether we understand anything at all kicks in. So, listen, I suppose the obvious question is, should Keir Starmer be cozying up to Donald Trump? To which the answer might be, yeah, of course he should be, stupid. There's a very real possibility that they'll be the two most powerful people in the English-speaking world this time next year. The two most powerful politicians. We may talk about Elon Musk later. But is it that simple? Because the other question, the one that made me think that I don't know anything, what would happen if a UK Prime Minister, if Keir Starmer in this case, were to say to and about Donald Trump that you are beneath contempt and we cannot, in all conscience, have anything to do with you. Because that's how Mohammed Fayed survived for so long. Because people would not call him out. People would not prioritise principle over self-interest. People would not jeopardise their own fortunes in order to do what was obviously right. Do you see what I mean? You see what the link is. It's a bit tenuous, obviously, but in some ways it's absolutely crystal clear and watertight. If nobody ever says Donald Trump's conduct is contemptible, Donald Trump's depravity, his amorality is a deal breaker, Donald Trump as an adjudicated rapist, as a multiply convicted felon, as an obvious I was going to say scoundrel, but that sounds a little bit Ealing Comedy or Terry Thomas, doesn't it? But you take my point. As a truly disgusting human being, by any objective measure, we apparently can't turn around and say, we are not going to do business with you. Keir Starmer has said it was good that he had the opportunity to meet the Republican presidential nominee and that the meeting was, quotes, really to establish a relationship between the two of them. They had apparently discussed the long-standing friendship between the UK and the US and the importance of continuing to develop the strong and enduring partnership between our two countries. Trump said of Starmer, I actually think he's very nice. He ran a great race. He did very well. It's very early. He's very popular. And one report at the BBC puts in the very next line, David Lammy had previously called the former president a racist and a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath. A 2-hour dinner they had. So I've got 3 questions for you. I always do, don't I? When I start talking at 10 o'clock, I'm never quite sure I've got 1 question. By the time I get to 15:15, I've almost always got 3. The first one is the strangest one. And it only just occurred to me as I read those words. How does this make you feel? You know what Donald Trump is. If you want to deny what Donald Trump is, there are websites where you can spend the rest of the morning, I'm sure. This is not really the kind of... it just isn't. It's too late. I can't help you now. You want to deny the evidence of your own eyes and ears. You want to deny the evidence of convictions, of court cases, of multiple affidavits, attestations. I think Rudy Giuliani, his favourite lawyer, was struck off in another district yesterday. You remember the press conference outside the garden centre that they mistakenly booked because they thought it was a hotel. All of it. But most of all, January the 6th. Most of all, the willingness, the... determination, if you like, to resist defeat, even if it meant murdering his own vice president. That man there could be back in the White House next year, early next year. How does the fact that Keir Starmer has to cozy up? No, that's not true. How does the fact that Keir Starmer has cozied up to him make you feel? Did Keir Starmer have any choice? 2 questions. That's question 1 and question 2. How does it make you feel?